Hi friends, welcome to my course for new managers, and it's all about the essential skills of leading people, teams, and improving processes. You know what happens? You get promoted because you're good at doing your job, and your job is a good engineer, software developer, salesperson, whatever it is. And you know how to do that job, and then suddenly you're promoted to be the leader of a team of people. And those skills that you know you're good at, you don't use that much. But now there's a whole set of skills that can sink you or make you successful, but you may not have. And that's what this course is about. Those skills are about leading teams, developing individuals, and developing and improving work processes. That is the goal of the course, to assure that you are successful in your job of leading people, leading teams, and improving processes. That is the primary job of a manager at virtually any level of the organization. So I hope this course will set you on a path, develop good habits that lead to success. Now, I've been doing leadership development and organization development for more than 40 years. I'm ashamed to say how long. Written 11 books on the subject. You can Google me and find out more than you want to know. But there's something really important that I've learned, and that is that watching a series of videos, sitting there watching, or sitting reading a book, inputs information, but doesn't make you skilled. It doesn't make you effective. I am concerned about you being effective. I am concerned about you actually developing the skills. And you know what you have to do that? I know this is very bad news. You can't just watch the videos. Now, you can do whatever you want. You can just zip through the videos and say, hey, I did that. But so what? What I really want you to do is learn and develop the habits, the skills of effective leading people, leading teams, improving processes. And the way you're going to do that is you're going to do exercises. You're going to go to work. I know it's bad news, but you have to work. And I'm giving you 13 exercises to do during this course around those 3 big topic areas. And I'm advising you can't make you do it, but I would like you to work with a coach. And that coach can be a peer, that coach can be your manager, with somebody who can give you feedback, who you can sit down and go over the exercises with and say, what do you think? And they can say, well, here's what I think. They can give you some feedback from their own experience or from their own observation of you. If you really want to be successful, I want you to be recognized for that success. You should be recognized. Now, Udemy will send you a certificate of completing the course, but that's just like you've completed watching, okay? Not completed learning and doing. I want to give you a certificate for learning and doing. I want to give you a green belt certificate from the Institute for Leadership Excellence, but you have to do the exercises. You have to demonstrate to me that you've developed competence. And the way you're going to do that, there are 13 Word documents, 13 exercises in the course. You're going to do them, you're going to complete them, you're going to send them to me. I'm going to send you the certificate. Now, this diagram describes the basic structure of the course. There are 3 big circles, if you will. There's the circle of developing people, and here are the basic subject matters that are covered during the course. Then there's the block of information on leading teams, and you're going to go to work with your team. You're going to help structure your team, decide what decisions get made within the team, and then you're going to, those things lead up to, by the way, then you're going to work on improving the flow, improving the work processes. All this is based on lean management, Toyota production system. I've got a lot of experience in that, working with Honda and Toyota, Shell Oil Company, American Express, Honeywell, lots of great companies. I'm bringing that to you. I hope you'll enjoy the course. Sign on. Let's get started on the journey. Thanks. Hi folks, my name is Larry Miller. Welcome to my course on the new manager, the essentials of managing people, teams, and processes. Congratulations. If you become a new manager, maybe I should say condolences. Because, you know, in your old world, before you were promoted to a manager, you had a job and you knew what it was and you knew how to get it done and you were in control of it. It was just about your behavior, your motivation, your skills. And now you're a manager of others. And now life isn't so simple, is it? On the one hand, you've entered the world where there's immense opportunity to move up the ladder to greater compensation, greater responsibility, greater success all around. However, the other side of that, the condolences side of that, is that now you are dependent on others. Your success is only the degree to which you can cause other people to do their jobs well. And that's hard. It's not easy. I've been managing for about 40 years, managing a company and managing teams of people, developing people. And I know it's hard, and you don't always succeed. Sometimes you can't win. But you can maximize the probability of your success with every individual and every team if you have the fundamental skills, none of which are rocket science, none of which are that hard, but they're frames of mind, they're ways of thinking about the job. And there are very specific skills. And you know, skills are developed through action. You know, if you're going to learn to play the piano, you can't just read a book and then say, oh, I know how to play the piano. No, you have to put your hands on the keys and you have to practice, right? Which is true if you're learning golf or learning any sport. It's about behavior. It's about you developing the automatic responses that make you an effective manager. So as we go through this course, I hope you have a coach. Now that coach may be the immediate manager above you, or it may be a coach sort of on the side, if you will, who isn't the authority above you, but is a helper, somebody who can give you feedback and help you develop as a manager. I believe in having a coach, so I hope you do have a coach. But you and the coach are going to take action. As we go through each section of the course, I'm going to prescribe, I'm going to recommend, I can't make you do it, but I am going to recommend some exercises, some practice that will put the lessons to work. And only by putting your hands on the actual work, practicing, will you really become good and effective as a manager. And let's be honest, all of us who've been managing for a long time know we don't have it all down. I mean, it's a lifelong, it's like becoming a good parent, right? Or a good teacher or a good coach. It's a lifelong experience. There's always more you can learn. So in this course, I'm trying to provide the essentials of effective management, but I expect that it's the beginning of a lifelong journey. I hope it's the beginning of a lifelong journey for you. Now, let me talk about the three major sections of this course. One is a focus on people and the skills of people, motivating people, your communication skills. There's a whole section we're going to go through on communication skills, listening skills, giving and receiving feedback, very essential skills for a manager, learning to do that well. And even the discipline issue, right? The issue that none of us really want to deal with, but there are times that people don't perform, even though we've given them feedback, even though we've done a good job of doing the things we should do to motivate them and listen to them, communicate with them, etc. Sometimes you have to engage in a process of discipline. So we'll go through all those things. Each one of those is a subsection of the course. Now, in the world that we live in today, rarely do you just manage people one-on-one, individually. And in fact, that's the hardest way to manage people. Because if people are working together as a team, they motivate each other, and they teach each other. They learn from each other. They solve problems together as a team. So I wouldn't say it's just the easiest way to manage people, but it is definitely the most effective way to manage people in most organizations today, is to become an effective team leader. So there's individual skill that you're going to help your individual employees develop, individual motivation, But now you're also going to work with a group of individuals as a team, I hope. So we're going to talk about team leadership. There's a whole section on team leadership, the stages of team development, how to develop a team scorecard, and you know, if you look at any sport and you say, well, what makes a team perform? They have a scorecard. They know the score, and they're working towards the score, right? And towards the championship, towards some challenge, towards some goal. Well, the same things are true with working with a team at work. You want them to have the challenge, you want them to have the score, you want them to have targets and objectives. And we want to talk about how you make decisions, because there's individual decision making and then there's team or group decision making. And I want to help you to be effective in both, and I want to help you figure out when a decision should be an individual decision and when should it be a team decision. And then there is problem solving and continuous improvement. Every team, well, every individual really, should be involved in lifelong learning for the individual and continuous improvement, continuously getting better as a team. So I'm going to give you a process of working with your team to engage in continuous improvement, where they're always moving up a staircase, improving data and improving their behavior, improving their skills to achieve a challenge. So we're going to go through that whole process. And I want you to think about process. Because what do teams own? What are they responsible for? And what are you responsible for? You're not just responsible for people, you're responsible for a group of people getting work done. And they get work done through a process, and every process there's input and there's output. You measure the effectiveness of the process by the output of the process, right? I mean, if you're a restaurant, for example, there's input, incoming food stuff, and incoming people who are going to serve the food and make the food and so forth. Those are inputs into the process, and then there's a process of cooking, right? Preparing the meal and serving the meal. And the output is a customer who enjoys the meal, a good steak, a good whatever the dinner is, right? And a customer that's satisfied with that. Those are the outputs of that process. So you as a manager are going to be responsible for managing a process, and I'd like you just to think about something Dr. Deming, the great guru of quality management, said some years ago. He said 95% of the time quality problems are in the process, not the person, but 95% of the time we blame the person and don't fix the process, and then we can't figure out why the next person isn't any good either, right? Because they're working in a lousy process. Well, you will succeed largely to the degree that you are able to lead your team in the improvement of processes. So you need to know what your processes, you need to know who your team is, who's on your team, what your team is responsible for, and obviously you need to know who the people are, right? So we're going to go through all three of those things. And there is leadership, there's the development of people, you lead teams, you develop people, and you manage processes. And we're going to go through all three of those. That's the challenge. That's what the course is about. Come on and join me. I think you'll enjoy it, and I am quite confident you'll benefit from it in improving your own performance as a manager. Hi again, friends. I'd like to define terms, and particularly if you remember my circle of influence here that a manager has, there are three ways or three words to describe what a manager does to influence people, process, and teams. And those three words are leadership, management, and develop. And I'd like to just explain them a little bit more and talk about their relationship. And if you look at my circles here, it's significant and intentional that the circles overlap somewhat, because when you manage, develop, or lead a person, you are also impacting the performance of the team. When you develop a team, and when you coach a team and you motivate a team, that has influence, of course, on the individual. And both of those are what affect the process. So they are overlapping, although we'll talk about them as we go through the course somewhat separately, but there's always this overlap. Lead, manage, and develop. Let's talk about those three terms. Now, if you Google the term management online, you'll find hundreds of definitions if you keep looking, if you bother for that. But let's just talk about the big picture in terms of what that word connotes. What do you hear when you hear the word manage? And many people will hear the idea of controlling, the idea of you deciding what other people should do and making sure they do it, making sure they do it right, holding people accountable, that sort of idea of being in control. That's not a great way to think about your job as a manager, because if you think about your job as a manager as simply telling and controlling and deciding, you're going to turn people off, frankly. You're going to demotivate people. You're not going to be effective as a team leader. So you've got to do more than that. And when we think about management, let's just go down a list of things that management does here, and then let's talk about leadership and developing people and teams. One of your jobs is to utilize resources. Now, those resources may be money, you may have a budget, there's space in an office or a manufacturing plant, and they're people, they're the time of people. Those are the critical resources that you have, and your job is to use them in the most productive possible way. There's always this idea, which we'll talk about more later, of input and output, right? Input of money, input of people, input of space, and then you do something with it, which is a process, right? You utilize it, and then there's an output. The more output you can get for the less input, that's called efficiency or productivity, right? So your job is to maximize the productivity of your resources, of the time of your people, the utilization of your space, the utilization of your money, etc. So that's one job of the manager. People have energy. Leadership creates human energy by inspiring people and motivating and giving purpose. The manager gives it direction and says, in order to achieve the purpose, here's what we need to do. We need to move in this direction, or by listening to people and engaging people, involving people, defining processes well and defining what we need to do well. So you do assign tasks to people and you motivate people. You do manage a process. I hope as a manager know what your process is, what's the input, the output points, and what that process is that you're going to employ your team to improve and to manage. You engage people in continuous improvement. We don't live in a static world. Whatever we think the best way to do something is today, and we may be right today, it'll be wrong tomorrow. Why? Because of new skills, new technology, new customer demands, new changes in the external environment. We'll talk more about that later. But the world is dynamic, and there's no business that escapes this. I don't care whether you're a salesperson or whether you're in information technology, developing software, or you're in healthcare. It doesn't matter. We live in a very dynamic environment, and your job is to sense what's going on in the environment and help people respond to that. So there's a constant dynamic motion going on in the group of people who you manage, and your job is to sense that and give it guidance and work with your team in figuring out what the best way to adapt is. And yes, there is an idea of control. Processes can be in control or out of control. But it's better to think about the process being in control than the people being in control, right? The people are the dynamic energy that you have to utilize. The more you try to control them or give a sense of sort of authoritarian control, you drive out the energy, so you don't want to do that. What's the difference between management and leadership? What does a leader do that a manager doesn't? A manager is more tactical. A manager is more into the detail of specific tasks, of schedules and budgets and resources and that sort of thing. The leader says, why are we going where we're going? Where are we going? And why are we going there? Why is it worthwhile to go there? A leader has a sense of purpose, and a sense of purpose that ennobles others. Create a sense of purpose. You do have a job. Even though you're a manager, you have a job of leadership too. And that's it, to inspire people with a worthwhile purpose. Ask yourself the question, what do we as a company, what do we do as a unit, whatever our unit is, whatever we do, what do we do that's value adding? Why is it important? Who cares about it? What's the real purpose of it? You should think about that because you need to communicate that to your team members, all right? And that way you create energy. And if you're not able to talk about that, if you're not aware of what our purpose is and why it's worthwhile, think about worthiness. Why is what we do worthy? What is the worthiness in what we do? Because if you can't communicate that, your people will lose energy. The degree to which you can communicate that, you create energy. I hope that makes sense. And you can just sort of look at this list, but that's the very basic idea of what leaders do, and I hope you will see your job as a leader. You also have a development job, and that job is to develop the competencies of people. I know you're not the training department, but you are too. Yes, our parents, send their kids off to school, but you know who really teaches them more than the teachers in school? It's mom and dad, right? The greatest influence in our life, even though we may be very mature, is still our parents, what we learn from mom and dad, that model. And one of the jobs of leaders, by the way, versus managers, is to model the behavior that reflect our values. So I hope you will think about what are our values and how do I model the behavior that reflect those values, that exhibit those values. But development means training, it means coaching, it means building skills. We all need to, the reason you're taking this course is to build your skills, right? Well, every employee in every company needs to every day build their skills. And your job as a manager is to help your subordinates, to help your team members build skills by giving them feedback, by helping them with training. Maybe they're going through an online course and you can coach them in that online course. You can go through it with them. They can take this course, or they can take my team leadership course or problem solving course. And you can be their coach as they develop skills. But they also develop skills as you engage them. For example, we're going to talk about problem solving. As you engage them in problem solve, they're going to be learning to problem solve. If you brainstorm with them, they're going to learn how to brainstorm. If you teach them about a Pareto diagram and you do a Pareto analysis, they're going to learn about the 80-20 rule, the Pareto analysis. So we're constantly influencing our subordinates by developing their competence, and that's one of our central tasks. What is a process? We're going to use that word a lot. A process is a set of activities that lead to a result, right? And we're going to map processes. This is just a very sort of simple map, but it says, to make something, right? Or to provide a service, to cook a meal. My restaurant example, which is a nice simple one we can all think about, right? There is input, there's output, and there's the process of how do you make stuff? How do you cook a meal? What does a great chef do? Well, there's steps in the process. There's an order of things, but they're individual tasks, right? And the sum of those tasks is the process. And there's a flow through that process. And we are going to become experts in studying and improving our process as we go through this course. It's very central to being an effective manager today, no matter what field we're managing in or what kind of an organization. So I hope those 4 definitions are somewhat helpful to you. Let's come back, and I want to say a word about culture and values. Thanks. I first recorded this course about 4 years ago. I'm speaking now from February of 2022. And when I recorded the course, I considered that almost all the things I was teaching in this course were general in the sense they were not specific to a certain kind of company. And they were sort of eternal or skills that will last for a very long time. Like giving people feedback does not change every year, or the skills of facilitating a team. You know, they may change over a period of 10 or 20 or 30 years, something new may develop. But unlike, say, a software package with a 2.013, coming out this year where the instructor has to change the instruction, I thought my stuff was pretty lasting. But, wouldn't you know, something happened. And what happened, I think you all know what happened. What happened was the pandemic. And suddenly, instead of everybody having to show up for work, you know, remember that was a great phrase, you got to show up. And you want to get paid, show up. That's the main thing you have to do, is show up. Suddenly, instead of everybody having to show up, unless, by the way, you were in manufacturing, where you still had to show up, or if you worked in a hospital or transportation or some things like that. But if you were a knowledge worker in an office developing software, doing engineering, etc., we went from having to show up to having to not show up, having to stay home. And this was radical. I mean, this was just a radical change. Many people didn't think you could do your work at home. And suddenly a lot of people learned that, son of a gun, I not only can get it done at home without all the hassle of driving into work, I feel more productive. I am more productive. I enjoy my work more. I get to spend time with my kids. I get to walk my dog. I get to do all kinds of things I wasn't able to do before. Now I can do all those things working from home, and I like it. And what happened? Suddenly, when the pandemic began to slow down, a lot of companies said, okay, everybody back in the office. And a lot of employees said, no, that's stupid. I've been doing my work at home successfully, and I like it. And there's no reason for me to sit in a cubicle like Dilbert in an office setting, where I'm actually less productive, I'm distracted, and I waste all that time getting to work, and et cetera, et cetera. So then we had, what people began to call the Great Resignation. And the Great Resignation is that a lot of people have decided that they're going to change jobs rather than be forced to sit in a cubicle in an office or sit in an office in an office. They want the opportunity to spend more time at home. That doesn't mean all the time at home. I don't think we're going from everybody in the office to everybody at home to everybody back to the office or everybody stay home. I think we're going to a hybrid model, and a lot of companies are doing this, and a lot of companies now say that they are, 80% of people in a recent survey said their employers had adopted a hybrid working model. Even the U.S. government, believe it or not, has adopted or enabled, certified, if you will, a hybrid model in the government workplace. So this is becoming quite normal now. And you as a new manager, all the skills that we're teaching in this course, you need to think about how to apply them when half your people may be on a Zoom call and half in the office, or maybe everybody will be on a Zoom call or Microsoft Teams or whatever software package, you know what I'm talking about. It may be that 3 days a week everybody's home and 2 days a week everybody's in the office, or some people are working remotely all the time. I mean, there's all kinds of mixes that can go on. And what I'm going to suggest to you is you have to design that intelligently. We have to think intelligently about it rather than think about it in terms of absolutes. Everybody in the pool, everybody out of the pool. No, we're going to design the hybrid work system that will work for your team, which will be different than somebody else's team, right? So I want you to be able to think about that well, and that's really the purpose of this section of the course. Just some interesting statistics. I think 74% of knowledge workers say they'll quit their job. This is the Great Resignation, for an opportunity to work from home. And they're not necessarily saying 5 days a week from home. We're going to talk about that later, because I'm not going to try to sell you on everybody working from home. I think that's a bad idea, in fact. But there's a point of moderation. Moderation in all things is a nice saying that I think rings true with me. Absolutes, everybody one way or everybody another way, usually is wrong for some number of people. So we're going to think intelligently about it. A lot of people will quit if they can't spend at least a good bit of time working from home. Some will quit, increasing this is sort of a recent study, to save money because it costs money, the transportation, or maybe they can live in a place, if you can live in West Virginia versus Washington, D.C., just as an example I'm using. It's a hell of a lot less expensive than living in Washington, D.C., which is very expensive. And you can think of lots of examples like that. People will quit to spend more time with their family, to be able to work from anywhere, work on vacation, work from, rent a cabin in the Appalachian Mountains and spend a month up there, and you can do your work like nobody ever noticed you weren't at home or even in the office. People felt more productive. 35% of people said they felt more productive. And a lot of people said, my mental health is better. I'm more relaxed. I'm less stressed working from home. And that's a pretty good reason to want to work from home. A lot of people say they were more productive. This is a study from New South Wales, Australia. It was a good study. I'll attach it as a resource to this lecture, and you can look at the data yourself. But a lot of people who have worked in a hybrid environment, work from home, felt more productive. I did a survey of people on my mail list who are mostly knowledge workers, and it was a general consensus that you weren't less productive, you were more productive. They felt more productive working from home. And in the future, when you ask people what do they want in the future, what do they see for themselves in the future, they don't say, I want to spend all the time at home. Most people don't say that. Only 10% said that. 55% said they want to blend. Some people, 35%, said they want to go back to the office full time. Fine. They can, as far as I'm concerned. They can go back to the office full time. But everybody doesn't have to go back to the office full time. Okay, let me stop right here, because I think those are sort of realities that I think you know about. I want to come back and I want to talk about a very recent study that Microsoft did. Over 61,000 of their employees who are knowledge workers. And they discovered some pretty important things about remote work that we should take into account as we think about the future of our hybrid work system.
Hi again, friends. During this section of the course, we're going to get into the whole issue of managing and improving the performance of people. And you'll remember my 3 circles, which you'll see too often, I'm sure. We start with the people area and talk about managing, developing, and leading people. And then we'll talk about teams, and then we'll talk about process. But there's a big section on people, but it's broken down into several sections. The first section here, I want to talk about developing skills, developing competence. Now, if you back up and you think about human performance, what is it that makes up human performance? Now, it's a complex subject, but the basics of it are really pretty simple. And think about it this way. On the one hand, there's the ability to do something, the skill, the competence, and then there's the motivation to do something. In other words, if I have never learned how to touch type, and you put pages in front of me and a keyboard, and you say, Larry, I'll give you $1 million if you can type those words at 70 words a minute. Now, not that I'm a money-grubbing capitalist, but I'll take the $1 million. I'd like to be able to do it. Now, if I've never learned to touch type, can I do it? I'm certainly motivated, right? But I don't have the skill, I can't do it. If you say, Larry, I'll give you $1 million to sing an opera, it ain't going to happen because Larry Miller cannot sing an opera. And there are many, many other things that I cannot do. And it's not wanting to, it's not motivation, it's simply lacking the skill. So we have to have the skill to perform, the competency to perform, plus we have to have the motivation. We have to have both of those things. So in this section of the course, I want to talk about developing competency, the can-do versus the will or won't do motivation part. So let's start breaking that down. And here's, I'm going to get out of the way so you can see this diagram. A long time ago, probably 30 years ago, I don't know, I read a book by Robert Mager and Peter Pipe called Managing Human Performance. I think that was the title of it. And this is that I've used this for years, and I've stolen it from Robert Mager. I simply call it the Mager model. And the Mager model, very simply, says you define what the behavior is, what the performance you want, and then there is the can-do versus the won't-do. There's the ability to do it versus the won't-do. And then they're on each side, and we'll talk about the motivation in another section after this one of the course. But I want to talk about the can't or can-do in this section. And when you look at, when somebody can't do something, they're not able to do it, whether it's playing a musical instrument or a sport or touch typing or operating a piece of equipment in your organization or writing a certain kind of code. If they can't do it, what do? And to break that down, think about it this way. There's behavioral skills, like I play the guitar. And if you play the guitar, there are patterns that become habitual, become very automatic. I do finger style, blues kind of guitar. And the thumb, bum, 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 bum. It's the rhythm section of the guitar, right? And you learn to do that. You don't think, it just bum, 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 bum does that, automatically. And that's your rhythm. And then you add, the melody with the fingers. And there are patterns on the left hand and patterns on the right hand. And as you learn to play the guitar, initially you struggle with those patterns. Initially you have to go remember, oh yeah, it goes here, then it goes there, then this goes there, there's a C chord and a G, and where's that? And your fingers don't really work well. But once you have developed some mastery of the skill, it becomes very automatic. You just change chords, really almost without thinking. And particularly the right hand patterns are very, very automatic for you. And that's a sign that you've developed the skill. When we drive a car, for example, we don't really think about what we're doing, do we? I mean, we don't think, okay, now I'm going to go right, so let's say I turn the wheel which way? Oh yeah, I turn the wheel this way. No, you don't think that. You just do it, right? It's very automatic because you've developed the habit patterns. You've developed the skill. All skills are things that become habitual for you, right? If they're not habitual, you really haven't developed the skill. Now, if you're going to develop a skill, and skills are different than knowledge, right? You can read a book and develop knowledge, but you can't read a book and develop the skill. There's education and there's training. This course is both education and training. I think the training is very important, and that means you have to practice things. That's why I give you assignments and ask you to work with a coach, because that's how you're going to develop skills. You're going to develop the habits. So if we want to develop a skill, we have to provide training. And I'm going to give you a model in the next lecture for providing very basic training. You as a manager, and there's just no way to escape this. If you think about the coach of a baseball team or any athletic team, they give direction and they say who goes into play now and who comes out now and what plays are we going to run. But really the most important thing they do is help their players develop competence, help them develop skill. Coaching a team of unskilled players is hell. Coaching a team of highly skilled players is a pleasure. Well, you want a team of highly skilled players, and you cannot simply rely on the training department. It's not okay to say, well, that's not my job, that's the training department's job. No, the training department may provide certain skills,
But you, as the manager who is on the spot, right, observing what people are doing, you are in the best position to help people develop skills. So in the next lecture, let me give you a model for doing that. Thanks. Hi again, friends. Let's switch now from the competency side of the equation to the motivation side of the equation. You'll remember my little formula here of competency times motivation equals performance, which is pretty right. I mean, there are other factors, but this is a nice simple way of thinking about what results in human performance on your team or in your organization. And you know, the subject of motivation, and I'm sure you've thought about this, I'm sure you've thought about it in terms of your own motivation from time to time, and you've probably thought about it in terms of the motivation of others around you or your team members. There have been hundreds of books written on this subject of motivation. I've written a few of them. And there are numerous theories of motivation, some named after the name of some professor who came up with an interesting construct. I'm going to give you a simple model. It's not a dumb model, it's a smart model, but it's simple. And what I've attempted to do in this model is integrate or unify different theories of motivation with a particular eye towards thinking about what you can actually do as a manager. You know, there's some theories of motivation that go into psychological states and, you know, even genetics, which you can't do anything about. So it's kind of none of your business. You don't have to worry about it. Just put that out of your mind. You as a manager have to think about how do I affect the motivation of those around me and those under me, my employees. So this model addresses things that you can do something about, which is your job. And your job, you know, there are theories of motivation that say, well, money doesn't matter. People don't care about money. They just care about self-esteem or something else. Look, don't worry about that. For you, it's not important. What your job is to maximize all the potential sources of motivation that can impact your people. So, you know, human beings are different. You know, we're diverse and we're unique, and depending upon how we were raised and what our interests are, you know, some people are very interested in money and moving up the ladder. Others are more interested in family time. There are lots of different interests that people have. So you can't, you know, you're not smart enough, and neither am I, to say, well, I'm going to do this for this person, and I'm going to do that for that person, I'm going to do this for this person, because you have to deal with them differently. No, you don't. What you have to do is you have to optimize all the potential sources of motivation for your team members. And if you're doing that, some people will respond to some things and others will respond to other things, and you'll be doing your job. Now, here's my little model, I'll call it a hierarchy of motivation. And I think you can, if you think about your own life, I think you can see this and understand it. And in the following lectures, I'll go into more depth into each of these areas. But one way of thinking about motivation is to think about this pyramid, where at the top of the pyramid, we have a spiritual nature. We have a search for meaning in our life, a search for purpose in our life. And that's the big deal for human beings, for the human condition. It's why we seek out religions, and why all religions all over the world give purpose and meaning to their followers. And people follow them precisely for that reason, because they need meaning and purpose in their life. And we don't have to say, well, one religion is better than another, or right or wrong, or any of that. None of that matters. I'm just sort of stating a sociological fact that religion and purpose, and that purpose may be country, it may be family, it may be community, in addition to religion. But we seek that meaning. Now, is there meaning at work? Is there purposefulness at work? And I would say, of course there is, which doesn't mean it's, quote, religious, but we find ways of finding meaning in our work. I find meaning in my work. I hope you find meaning in your work. So I'll call this sort of the spiritual realm, or the realm of purpose. You can think of that as the higher level of motivation. Then there's how we interact with other people. There's community, there's teams, there's families, there's social bonding. And it is our nature. It is in the human genetic code, if you will, in the human nature, to be motivated by being part of a group. You know, when I worked in prisons, people would say there's a gang problem. And I tell them, no, there's not a gang problem. Gangs are the solution to the problem. You know what the real problem is? You show me a community where the family unit is healthy and strong, I'll show you a community that does not have a gang problem. Show me a community where family units are in disintegration, where there is no safety for the young person in the family. And what do they seek? They seek a group, right? And that group is in the inner city and other places, and it happens all around the world, by the way. That's the gang. That's the group that's meeting the psychological need of bonding. Well, in the workplace, and I'm going to talk a lot about teams as we go through the course, but we like to work in groups, we like to work in teams, and I'll come back and talk about that. But that's the social dimension of motivation, and it's a major driver in our workplace. Then there's what I'll call situational motivation. And that's our immediate environment. That's the consequences to our behavior. That's the prompts, the stoplight, the sign that says safety. Wear a safety hat, you know, wear a hard hat, or wear safety gloves, or wear safety glasses, or, you know, we see these things in our work environment that, like the red light, the traffic light, the stop sign, they're meant to be cues, prompts, to stimulate a certain behavior, right? And then there are consequences to behavior. And we'll talk more about that in some depth. But those are things that we do manage. You know, we manage the social more than we manage the spiritual, although we do have an effect on that. And even more so, we manage the situational impact on motivation. So we're going to talk about how to do that. And you can think of that as sort of going from the material to the spiritual. And by, you know, saying that's material, I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just more immediate. It's more the immediate consequences to our behavior. So we're going to go through that model in the following lectures. And I hope you can see things, I'm sure you can see things that you will be able to do to maximize the motivation of your people. Thanks.